Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. Today, we're discussing a topic we haven't covered on the podcast. It's the world of grant writing and how we can use this tool to help farmers and ranchers turn their ideas into action and achieve their goals. Our guest is Juan Whiting, a fourth-generation farmer, ag entrepreneur, and a seasoned expert in navigating the often complicated world of agricultural funding. From working with the Conflict and Development Foundation in East Africa to leading his own company, Stray Acres LLC, Juan has a unique passion for linking farmers, ranchers, and their partners to the funding they need to build better environments, communities, and food systems. With over 8 years of experience living and working on agricultural projects in East Africa, and as an agricultural specialist in the U.S. Army, Juan brings unmatched insight into the intersection of agriculture, community, and leadership. This is just a cool conversation, so let's jump right in.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm joined by Juan Whiting today of Stray Acres. Welcome, Juan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Monty.
Well, sometimes, people say I wrote the book on that. And in your case, you really did. So Juan, tell us your story, a little bit of your background, and what brings you to where you are today.
Yeah. So, like I said, my name's Juan Whiting, and I'm originally from Mapleton, Utah, fourth generation farmer. And so I grew up in agriculture and just loved it. And ended up serving an LDS mission out in Kenya, and that's really kind of where my love for agriculture grew to more of focus on development and projects, where I started to see what's the intersect. And after my mission, I came back and still wanted to go into agriculture and focus on that. So ended up studying international agribusiness. And because I spoke Swahili, I kind of attracted some different folks. And sorry, I'm not even breathing right now. Here. Sorry. So I'd been studying for a while, for a few years, and then I decided that I wanted to keep going into ag development and go back to Africa. And when I ended up doing my master's degree in Texas A&M, and that had opened up some new doors for me. And I ended up meeting Howard Buffett, who was Warren Buffett's son, and they were looking for someone who spoke Swahili and who could work with pivot irrigation and run farms, and that led me into grant writing, more or less. So I was writing doing a bit of grant writing, and I loved writing before, but this really opened the doors for me because I was out in Rwanda with my family and was writing up projects, planning out seed systems, working with the government on policy. And what I was seeing was just this huge opportunity to collaborate, to create partnerships, to break down barriers and to break down silos, and to get people funding. And so I saw a lot of power in writing. And when I was at Texas A&M, I'd been with probably one of the best grant writers I've ever met, Dr. Pena. And I'll just give him a shout out if he's out there listening sometime. But he really instilled a love for writing in me. Grant writing is not one of the things I kind of, I'll tell people that, it's kind of like being the garbage man of the industry. Like, there's not a lot of people that want to do it, but there are, it does need to be done. And it opens a ton of doors, and it really gets people thinking deeply on like how do we solve some of these big problems instead of just pushing them off to the side and not getting it done because we just don't have the funding or we don't have the time. And so I fell in love with it because, like I said, that mentor really coached me and showed me, look, this is just about bringing people together, leading them out with ideas and asking them how do we solve this? Because they already know how to solve it. Um, anyway, that's a long story for how I got here. But after a few years of being in Rwanda and doing these kind of projects from the donor side, I I decided I was going to start my own farm management company. And this was me really taking a leap and saying, I'm going to actually do what I'm telling other people that they should do. And I started writing grants for myself, won about $1 million. And we were doing all sorts of different projects. I did a lot of things wrong, but I also did a lot of things right. And I started to see, from my experience on the donor side, where we were the ones giving and I was the one instructing people on how to write the grants. I was able to see a different way of going about it so that I could, you know, access funding that I couldn't access before. So that really opened a lot of doors for our company. And then when I left Rwanda after about 6 years, decided that, hey, this is something I really love doing. I wonder if there's something out here in the US that I could do. So I came back and was helping, trying to help farms as well. And I realized that there's really nobody that's doing this. It's kind of I mean, there's a lot of grant writers out there. There's not a lot of grant writers that were farmers before and ranchers and that had this experience of actually doing it on their end and on leading projects. And so I don't just write grants, but I help people plan projects. I help them leverage partnerships, and I help them think a lot bigger, a lot more holistic on how do we get funding. So that's kind of what we do now. So it's been a few years and it's been an exciting journey. And I've got my book here. So this year was the first year that I just took the leap of faith, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it out there. But yeah, this is the holistic funding approach. And my whole goal in writing the book was to give people options. I was finding that a lot of the time that I was spending was being on calls. A lot of people listen to podcasts when they're sitting in the tractor, as you know. So I know that I did. I know that I did. So I realized, they were either listening to podcasts or reading books. And so what I wanted to do is give people, that either didn't want a grant writer and they just wanted to try it on their own, or wanted to figure out what is this all about. I wanted to give them that information. And also, my wife was getting tired of me hopping on calls all day and just talking to farmers. So it's yeah, at the end of the day, it just gives people that information they need to get started.
So eventually, the book grew into your FAQ in order to be able to answer those questions and then be able to dive into deeper subjects as needed. It sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one thing for sure in farming is it's a capital intensive and low margin, high asset requirement. Working capital is always stretched thin, and lots of disruptions can happen to that. So oftentimes it's kind of hard for a farmer to go to something new. Maybe if the farmer wants to go direct to consumer or wants to start doing their own processing or wants to add a diversity to their cropping mix, all of those things, it's kind of hard to grow in those areas because working capital is so precious. Do you see that's one of the problems in farmer diversity of income?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it limits the creativity. So where I stand on that is that it's when you are strapped with cash, and this is just like from personal experience running farms, that your creative juices are just drained. I mean, you're not out there thinking about, hey, what new crop can I do, or how can I reach my customer base better? We become much less creative, and we become much more just strained. And I think that it's not just resources, but just our energy and our the way that we approach things becomes strained. And I find that with a lot of ranchers and farmers that I talk to. And so when you open that door and say, hey, give me your Christmas list. If you could fund anything, tell me what would it look like? And they start saying, well, maybe I'd want to do like Christmas trees on the side or, just for fun for the kids. And I'm like, well, there's a fund for that. They've got a grant for that. And they're like, no. Oh yeah, there is. And same thing's true with some of the more specialty crops that you want to do, or if you want to reach out directly to schools and get them the produce and get them healthy produce, something that you're passionate about. So I find that a lot of farms get that you end up in this drudgery zone where farming is not fun anymore. And I think that when you're in there, you really need to be questioning at what point did it stop becoming fun? And when did we lose the passion? Because that goes out with the capital as well, right?
Yeah, it's hard to be creative when you're wondering if you're going to be the generation that loses the farm. That
100%.
that
No,
is
it's a lot of
the
stress.
struggle, and there's been a lot of struggle in all sectors of the ag economy here in the last year or two. So, um, now, like you mentioned, there's a lot of grants out there that we don't even know exist, and there's some that we do. And I've thought about with our direct to consumer business company that we have on our farm. There's been some nice USDA grants that you could apply for to do on-farm processing, to do more on-farm distribution, because there's certain programs within the government that want to see food more robust, less more options than just the big monster centralized model right now. So they're trying to figure out how to make it happen, and there's this kind of will, and there's this pool of money, and then there's me over here as a farmer, and I'm sure several other farmers, and you look at the forms and you're like, oh my, how do you do this? And how much time is this going to take? And I'm going to go through, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go through all this stuff. And then I'm going to take all this time to do it. And they're not going to pick me. So w- walk us through how you do that, what your role is in there. But I think there's also something to be said of going through that process causes you to be more intentional about your business, your strategic plan, and what goals that you want to accomplish so that maybe it isn't 100% waste of time.
Well, yeah, and I'll address that last part first because I think that the way you just said that's perfect. I mean, you're starting this out intentionally, and you're saying, look, we're going to write this down. This isn't like a business plan. I think a lot of people think, well, grant writing is just writing a business plan. It's much more than that because you have to have the budget planned out. You have to have very specific goals and objectives and metrics for measuring success. And once you've gone through the process of building this out, you see very clearly, you might call it manifestations or whatever, but you've built out your project in your mind and you've articulated on paper that there's something very powerful to that. So just the act of doing that, I think I've seen it over and over again that it's a very powerful just way of just being very intentional about your business. But going a step beyond that, you start to when you start to take the next step and preparing for winning the grant, you're going to be reaching out to partners. You're going to be collaborating with the schools or with local nonprofits if you're doing some kind of conservation type project. And when you do that, your these partnerships don't just go if you don't get the funding. I mean, they don't just leave you. That there's an opportunity to continue those partnerships. And I find that if there's one thing that makes the grant writing worth it, it's the partnerships. It's the leveraging those because oftentimes we as farmers and ranchers, we are just rugged individualists and want to do it on our own. There are there's good enough. I'll tell you, the guys that win grant after grant are the guys that are out there in their community building. They're connected to the county commissioner. They're out there working with the schools. They're doing all this service, and people are like, man, when do you get time? They're out there developing relationships, and they're building a little ecosystem, and it just creates a lot of impact. So, like you said, that I think that's a major, even if you don't get the funds, that's a major reason to do it because you're going at it with an intentional plan, and that makes you a leader just right there. If you tell people, hey, we're going to set up a processor, we're applying for this, we need to get your, we need a letter of collaboration or a letter of support. All of a sudden, people see that you're, yeah, this is actually happening, and they want to be part of it. And that's leadership. So, uh, what I tell people as far as what I do is I try and take all the busy work and all the frustration that you're going to feel and trying to figure that out online. It's it's it can be very time consuming. So when we start to build this out, we need it to be very organized and clear when we send it out to, and if you're doing a federal grant, which are the larger grants, like you were talking about the processing grant, we can't you can't miss any documents. And so it does help to have somebody. If you do it on your own, I'd suggest people to people that, just make sure you choose a grant that's not crazy, right? You try and do a federal grant on your own. Um, Most times you're going to find just a huge headache trying to turn it in on grants.gov. It does help to have a grant writer at some point helping you organize everything and submitting it. So what I'll do is I'll help create a timeline, create a calendar, and we're making sure that we're hitting all these deadlines, because oftentimes if you just wait till the last second, it's just not going to happen. And you need at least a month. That's what I tell people is like, look, just at least have a month, if not a month and a half, to prepare all these documents so that you're not just overwhelmed, and so that you're not stressing other people out when you need letters of support, or you need letters of commitment, or you need financial documents from your accountant.
So how do you address, people that maybe haven't even considered seeking out grants before, or as farmers, we're anti handouts, okay, but we're also under the understanding of, yeah, well, we got to take the handouts to be competitive because everybody else is taking the handouts. That mentality comes through. But, as really kind of as a group, and maybe there's other groups too that are like that, but farmers aren't kind of handout oriented. We
No.
like to be independent. How's some ways you've coached people to kind of deal with that, and then open the mind to seeking out where those opportunities would be with wherever their business is at to seek. You're essentially asking for
Mhm.
um, stock or capital. It's like issuing shares to your company, but you're not diluting yourself. You're not giving up ownership. You're doing a fundraising event through a grant. How do
Mhm.
you relate that to people to get over that handout mentality?
That's a great question. I would say that the biggest thing that because anytime I hear that, I get excited because it's an opportunity to really change some minds. The reason that it's not like a handout at all in any way, shape, or form. That's not that there are some that are a little bit more like a handout, like if there's a disaster relief or drought relief grant that's there. But at the same time, you need that, right? It's very similar to if at the end of the year that you're writing up your tax, you're getting all your taxes done, and you're like, you know what, I don't need any handouts from the government. I'm not going to get any of these write-offs. No problem. Any uh, you know, self-respecting agribusiness that said that, you just have to wonder, like, what are you thinking? This is you know how to do business. Get all the write-ups and deductions that you can, right? So with grants, the thing that's a little bit different, well, actually, it's very similar to deductions and write-offs, is that you're solving a major problem, and the government wants to incentivize that. So we're not just giving you a handout because we're worried about you or because you can't do it on your own. We are giving you funding to solve a huge problem, right? So let's talk about rural electricity. There's a REAP grant, and I'll tell you, I've won 100% of them, which I can't say that about most grants, but the rural energy for America program is just absolutely phenomenal. Most farmers do not go for it. Can you imagine getting a second source of income on your farm from either setting up solar panels or some other energy creating system, and the government gives you $500,000 for that? It's going to solve some major problems. They understand that farmers need to increase their self their self-reliance. They need to be able to create, some of them need to be creating energy for their rural communities. So when we're solving these problems, absolutely, we shouldn't feel bad about taking money. But we're the backbone of America. So if we're feeding people, if we're feeding schools and getting them nutritious meals, and you feel like you're getting a handout because the government's paying you $1 million to set up a program and take initiative on that, I don't see that as like I don't see that as a handout. And I think that if you take the time to realize that the huge problems that you're solving, whether that's soil, the environment, the water, making it cleaner, all of these problems that you're probably solving already without any grant funding, I think it's really it's critical that farmers, especially and ranchers right now, take a step back and say, what are we doing right now on our own, not collaborating, not talking to the fish and wildlife, not talking to the local schools, not talking to the government in our area. And I know that, and I completely understand that most rural folks, and that's where I come from, we don't really trust the government, and it's totally fair. I think most Americans at this point don't trust the government. It's something we all kind of have in common at this point. Before, I don't think it was like that as much,
One
but
thing we can agree on. That's amazing.
we can we can all hate them the same, yeah. But I think that if you take a step back and you realize that there's an opportunity out there, so many opportunities. Like when you have all this land, there's opportunities all around. Whether it's creating habitats for endangered species, you can be a part of that, even if you feel like, hey, this is for hippies or whatever. I've talked to farmers that are like that, and then they realize, well, yeah, but if I improve my watershed and bring back the local red spotted toad, I'm also improving the my landscape. I'm improving the water for my cows, and I'm just being more sustainable. And I get a biologist that comes out and tells me about my trees and fixes some of these things, and I'm not paying for that. So I think that it's important to take all of your, limiting beliefs and all of the feelings that you might have as far as the whole welfare idea, put them off to the side for a second. Like, I mean, I understand that we want to be self self-sufficient and self-sustaining, but if you're solving big problems, be part of the community and be okay receiving funds for that. Like, I don't see why would you not take the community wants to pay you, right? If I wanted to, I want to see my taxes. If I'm paying taxes, I want to see that go into rural communities because I know that that's going to improve our nutrition. It's going to improve. It's like I said, it's the backbone of America. I don't think anyone's arguing that we shouldn't be improving that. If we see more jobs going out to rural communities and people wanting to go and live there, I, I think that we're going to see a healthier nation.
So you alluded to a few things in there, Juan, as far as different projects that I hadn't thought of. Almost, I'm tempted to do a lightning round here of just
Yeah,
all kinds of projects that you've done in a wide range of things that maybe okay, so we're over the handout phase now, and we're to
100%.
the part of what do we do? What's out there? What is out there that I'm interested in? There's lots of things, but I may not be interested in 99% of them, right? But just throw out some ideas for listeners of things that are out there to where essentially what we're trying to do is use our land for more than one thing at a time, right?
Hmm.
It's a way to stack enterprises on our land to drive more revenue, create more value, not only for ourselves, but for the environment, neighbors, communities, like you were saying. Rattle off some that you think listeners may or may not know about.
Yeah. Well, so one of the major ones is so I like to put them into categories. So if
Okay.
we look at conservation, that's a big category. If you're next to, if you're next to BLM land or you're next to you're able to work with the Forest Service because you're right next to a state park or something. There's a lot of opportunities there to get funding to protect the forest, to protect the soils. I know of farmers and ranchers that I've worked with that have been able to get grazing, get paid to do grazing to prevent forest fires. That's a bizarre one, right? But we need to see more of that, right? Because instead of spraying it with glyphosate and trying to kill weeds in the forest and killing the habitat that the Forest Service wants to keep alive, we can just send in our goats, our sheep, or our cows and make some of that and make it more resilient to forest fires. That's one, right? Uh, if we're talking about soil health, there is so much funding for that. NRCS, obviously, most farmers and ranchers will be aware of the funding from EQIP and from CSP. So that's funding that's not even a grant. That's just you applying for funding, and they should give you funding that will it's more or less match funding to improve your soil. While you're doing that, let's start talking about carbon credits. Let's start looking into how can we improve improve our soil and start putting down cover crops and get paid to put down cover crops. And then on top of that, figure out how we get into the carbon market. That's just growing and becoming more sophisticated. And there's a lot of resources and vendors out there that I love to connect farmers and ranchers to that just get the job done. And there's funding out there to that you can get paid every year
And
per acre.
the carbon world's still kind of a wild west too. And there's, sometimes you work with people who are the broker for the person who's the broker who's there can be so many layers involved in there that
Absolutely.
you are better to work maybe directly with, for example, Soil and Water Outcomes Fund versus
Mhm.
who Soil and Water Outcomes Fund works through. There's just kind of these multiple layers that can be confusing in it too. But no,
Absolutely.
continue on.
Yeah.
Along
So
with the
so that's
conservation related grants.
that's conservation. And then getting into actual implementation, what I find is that the people that are building these that are going out of their way to write grants, a lot of them are saying, well, how can I help other farmers in my community? You start thinking outside of yourself and you say, well, what if I do a youth training and bring people out to my farm? There's funding for that. What if I start to train other farmers and do demo farms? There's funding for that.
Huh.
And that enables you. Now, when I tell farmers and ranchers is that, look, before you go into this into this grant, let's look and see how is this actually going to help your operation, right? Doing a demo farm may not be super helpful. It might take a lot more time. If we can pay your salary from this, the work that we do here, or if we can find a way to improve some land that you need to improve, maybe it's going to be worth it. Okay. So that's like training side, focusing on with other organizations on helping other farmers and ranchers. And then if we go to science, right? If we go to, hey, what are you doing out there on the farm that's new and unique and can drive an impact? There's all sorts of SARE grants out there, and there's funding. There's beyond SARE. There's foundations that will fund like FFAR. They have seeding solutions where they'll give up to $1 million to help farmers connect with universities or other research partners to do research. And a lot of this is a lot of farmers that I talk to, they're doing crazy stuff. I mean, I know that my grandpa was always out there um, doing a new project and he loved it. He was just doing it for fun. And a lot of them just say, well, I'm not a scientist. And I say, well, you are. You're just doing it applied. And that's what people want to see. They want to see something that can be replicated on 100 other farms. And the fact that you're a farmer and you're simplifying this and making it tangible makes it of value. And there's funding for that. So going off of that, let's talk about kind of income producing. We talked about the REAP grant. That's a big one, right? I can't get over the fact that there's just not enough people applying for it. And if you don't have solar on your farm or your ranch, then let's talk about it. Let's talk about getting it out there and seeing if it can actually benefit you. If we can cut costs of electrical costs, or if we can increase, bring in a second source of income, I think it's huge. So those are a lot of the grants that I see there's other categories that you might fall into if you're like a veteran or you're a minority farmer, and there's funding out there for those folks as well. And if you're not, then you might be working with them. You might say, well, I'm right next to a reservation. I'd love to do a project where we're all working together. Um, Another funding opportunity would be like the specialty crops funding that I kind of I mentioned it really briefly, but that would be, if you want to test out a new crop that could be beneficial for the entire region, you can go for it. And there's some funding for that. If you want to set up greenhouses and set up new technology, there's new technology funds and opportunities there. And then I'll just make one last point, but if you are doing any kind of serious technology or serious business and you want to get major funding, there is the SBIR fund, and that's a great one. It is a lot of work, and you are going to have to use a grant writer for it. But like we talked about before, there's a business plan and then there's a grant, and this would get it puts your ducks in a row so that your business can thrive. And they give you phase one funding, and then after that, to really figure out how do we commercialize this. So if it's like a new fertilizer, I've worked with a company that won one that was doing uh, they were doing soil amendments that made that made it that helped farmers become more drought tolerant and or drought resilient. I guess that's the word, but uh, they're going on for a second phase of funding, which will be up to $1 million.
Yeah, I'm familiar with one of those. One of the companies worked with a little bit. That's why they're developing a new biocontrol for nematodes, so a whole new area. And they've been able. It takes a lot of money to do the
Yeah.
research on biopesticides, and they've been able to do 2 rounds of SBIR grants to get them much further along in the process. But that lets her then, not have to dilute her ownership percentage because she's had funding come in from those grants. So instead of having to go out and raise capital from someone else, she's been able to use the grant money to continue to do the research, and it's made a huge difference for that small company, because when you get into these big ideas for a small company, it's just really a struggle to get it across the goal line without giving up your entire business to do it. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Now, you mentioned um, briefly, and I had it written down. That was my follow-up question: is ungranted funds. I would assume there's probably quite a bit of dollars out there that are just never utilized.
Ab-
And
Absolutely. It's mind blowing to see how much. Well, and you'll see these big organizations, and this is what I tell farmers and ranchers is that. So in the book that I wrote, I take a lot of time to really emphasize that even if you're not going to write a grant, go out there and go build relationships. Go ask people what opportunities are out there and go be part of the programs. Because guess what? All these huge organizations that you're all bitter about, or all the universities that you're bitter about because they're getting millions and well, billions of dollars, right? I mean, Texas A&M, number one uh, grant recipient in the world. Well, in the world, yeah, it's probably in the world. And they have to work with farmers. They have to work with ranchers when they work on these projects. So when they work with them, you just need to know that there's funding out there, and you should be a recipient of that, right? So it's not a bad idea to figure out, like, how can I be a subrecipient? How can I be part of the grant? How can I get written into the grant rather than me writing the grant? And that's a strategy as well. But you need to be part of the conversation early on. You can't just be sitting back there and think, well, they're going to come to me. They don't, right? So what I help try and tell people is that, look, a lot of this funding, it'll either go back to the agency, or uh, it might just get wasted somewhere. Oftentimes, if it goes to universities, about 60% of it or 40% of it goes to overhead. So I would prefer that have less and less funding go to universities. This might be a controversial thing to say, but I want to see less of it go there, and I want it to see every time that there's farmers or ranchers or there's small nonprofits that are winning these, they're getting the job done, and they're connected to their communities. So we need to get that funding out of these big universities that already steal from our kids, right? I got stolen from, so I mean, I love Texas A&M, but man, it's not cheap to go to school anymore. I don't think they need any extra money.
Well, this episode of the podcast was not sponsored by the Texas A&M Aggies, or
Well,
but you're right.
It's
I
funny
know.
though. Most of the professors will say the same thing. They'll be like, we don't need 40%
Right,
for overhead. That's crazy.
right,
That's the whole project. You took 600,000 of your and
right.
it's all going to what?
Well, new buildings and shiny cars for the dean. So
Fair enough.
anyway, we
Fair enough.
I mean, that's one of our frustrations as our business when we do research at universities is the pay for the overhead. It's one thing to sponsor the student, but then the cost of overheads is just becomes ridiculous working with them, and it drives people to third party research. That's what drives that.
It
But
does. And they do a dang good job most times.
and honestly, the people who are giving the grants, whether it's government grants or nonprofit organizations, or whoever is interested in, or energy companies that are giving these grants out, they want to see it used as effectively as possible. But just because it's a university, they know that there's 40% overheads or 60% overheads, depending. Um, they would rather see that money. You've probably got a good chance of doing things because you're more cost competitive for the end result than
Mhm.
maybe what some of these things that are going on today.
Yeah, and you're going to have someone like myself that's going to be reviewing your grant that is looking at it and saying, this is actually going to make an impact. So if we can tell the story from our hearts, and not to be cheesy or emotional about it, but if you have a bunch of letters of support, that's where there's a lot of emotion, right? You get people that say, we really need this. You have the school write and say, look, we need nutritious food and we need it. We know Farmer Joe. He's been trying to work with us for years. All of a sudden, this isn't just like some technical write up proposal. It's something that has a lot of emotion and passion behind it, and that really touches people, and it feels like humanity for a second.
Hmm. And that's a good point. You got to think about this isn't just a piece of paper you're filling out, right?
No,
To check the boxes. There's some poor person that's going to get stuck reading all these things, right? So, oh, make the life of the person reading this a little bit better. Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
you have to check all the boxes. Do you meet the criteria? Well, then someone has to review it and be nice to that poor soul that's doing that, right? And that makes a difference in your guaranteed, like you were saying, you guarantee 100% acceptance. No, I'm
No,
just
no, no, no.
I'm just
On the
joking.
reprint,
I'm
on the
joking.
reprint, I'm close. Like that's where I'm at. But I won't say it's because I'm the best grant writer in the world. But I do feel like if you make their life easier, that's the best way you can
Right.
put it. Like if you can think about the reviewer and how they're going to read this, if you turn it into some insane like complicated thing and feel like you just got all these papers mixed up and you send it, it happens all the time. And these reviewers are just like, I'm not reading this.
Plus, you're the subject matter expert typically, right? And the person applying for the grant is the subject matter expert in this field, and some of the people writing the grant may not, even though they're within that, they don't understand your solution, right? So you have to keep it
Keep
simpler
it
and in
simple.
their terms, kind of
Mhm.
relate it to where anyone can understand what you're trying to accomplish. Is that kind of what you're alluding to there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So after what's the next step after we purchase your book? What do we need to take a look, and where are some areas in that you help people after they've read, reviewed, and you've got some ideas targeted for then maybe they want to do some sort of a prairie restoration project or savanna project, or and then tacking on water quality and carbon with that, and livestock production, and they want to go ahead and direct to consumer, and they want to do processing. I mean, there's lots of synergies that can be built all around this. How do you get involved directly yourself then with folks?
So where I'll get involved is we start having a conversation like this, and we start asking about, well, what are the kind of projects that are going to have an impact on your operation or on your community, whatever your goals are, right? And then we start to kind of put together a Christmas list. Like, what would we need to get funding or funded to make this a success? Maybe that's staff, maybe that's a new barn or a new processing facility, like you alluded to. And once I have those in my hands, then I can do a grant search. So this is what I call a funding strategy. So we'll do a holistic funding strategy where we start to say, well, what kind of partners are we going to need for this prairie restoration? And where's it going to be? And then I can go through and start searching through, over 4,000 grants and find two or three that could fit, right? And then we see which one do we have the best shot of winning? Because a lot of these grants, they're 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 not out there. Like, people aren't seeing them. The ones that you see everyone commenting on LinkedIn, I would just take a step back and be like, hey, maybe I don't want to go for that,
That's
right?
saturated. Yeah, too much
That's
competition.
climate smart commodities. I had four people that are like, hey, you want to write this for me? I'm like, okay, but just know that there's a thousand. Well, there's probably there was thousands and thousands of people that applied for that, and then the only people that won was General Mills and Texas A&M and some other big universities, right? Like,
Man,
but I'm not saying I'm not saying that everything's rigged. There are things that I do feel are very political. I'm hoping that with this new administration that things are. We'll see what happens. There's also there's pluses and minuses on the funding side with the new administration that's coming in. So I try and take a very unbiased approach to what's this going to look like in the future. But I will say that there's grants out there that a lot of people aren't applying for that aren't going to be as politically charged, and that you're going to probably have a lot more success with. Um, Especially if we go and we find a unique one that nobody knows about or that nobody's going for, and we have the right partners in place. So that's really what the funding strategy is all about. It's like we find our top 10 to 20 grants, and then we have the dates so that you're not finding out the week before or the day before, oh yeah, here's this opportunity. Most of the farmers I talk to are like, "Oh, yeah, we heard about this last year because Joe just finished applying and then he told us about it." I'm like, well, that's not helpful. So they find out after the grant's over, and they're frustrated. Um, I think with this new year coming up, there's a lot of funding that I'm hearing about every week right now that if people are interested, the way that I get started is with a funding strategy. So we need to know about the projects, and I need to know about the partners, because you might say, well, I can't apply for this foundation funding, but you probably can if you have a good nonprofit partner. You don't have to apply directly. And there's many times that I'll use this strategy where we'll work as a farmer directly with a nonprofit, and then we'll be able to win that funding. And you can use the reputation of another organization. And not only that, you're not the one that's going to be writing all the reports back to USDA or back to whatever organization you're applying to, right? So there's a lot of benefits to you not being the one that applies, and you can still figure out what your budget's going to look like and get paid that.
interesting.
So yeah, so that's kind of how I get started. And then once I select the grants that we want to go for, I can help them with the writing, or they can work with another grant writer, or they can do it on their own. Like, I'm not trying to tell them that you can't do a grant. I am going to tell them that, look, this is a lot of work, and it's it's work outside of the hundred other things you got to do on the on the farm and ranch. And my biggest goal as a grant writer, an agricultural grant writer, is that I want people to be motivated and not have a miserable experience so they never do it again. I can't tell you how many people have talked to me and been like, "Well, we tried to apply for that stupid grant," and I'm like, "Well, you probably forgot one piece of paper, and you're really frustrated now. You're applying for a $2 million grant, and you're scrimping on the application process. I don't understand that, right? I mean, I know I do understand it internally because we used to do that with our tractors. Like we'd jimmy rig them, and pretty soon you're the only one that can drive it. So,
So
yeah,
that happens on your farm too, you're saying. Okay.
yeah, it used to not when yeah it when I was on my growing up on my grandpa's farm, like it was just like why do we do this? Why don't we just get a new tractor? Like we'd probably save money. Um, but yeah, it's a lot like if you were to ride in a big century race with on a bike, and you put in all this effort, and you've got all the partners, you've got your team that's training you, and you've done all the exercise and all the training for the last year, and then you get a cheap bike to go ride in this race. And I think that you really need to think about where you're gonna what are you gonna spend, and what is it gonna give you? And with a good grant writer, what you're gonna get is you're gonna save a lot of time trying to research how do I fill out these documents, because a lot of them you have to fill them out perfectly. There's no room for error. If you make a mistake, most times the donors are going to look at it and say, well, throw that out, because they're looking for an excuse to get rid of you.
All right.
It's like these resumes. If you didn't have anyone look over your resume when you turned it in to go apply for, this corporate job, nobody's going to look at it. It just goes through that computer and just gets thrown out. So that's the first thing. It just goes before it even gets to the reviewers. Oftentimes it's just getting sorted out because you forgot one document.
At minimum, you need to have probably someone review it that has experience with that.
That's what I would do
Not
on the
not your
minimum.
mom. You know, they're checking your homework. It's someone
Yeah,
with actual experience or has been through the process before. But then you could go all the way up to where you partner with someone like yourself,
yeah.
and doing the search, doing the helping you build out the framework, setting the timelines, and those kind of things. So I know you're a wonderful man, Juan, but I'm pretty sure you don't work for free. So I'm assuming most grant writers have some sort of a charge process that they do.
Yep.
Is it an hourly basis, a project basis, or
Mhm.
percentage of the grant, or a little bit of all three, or something?
It's definitely not going to be a percentage of the grant. Any
Okay.
professional grant professional is going, because we're not. If you are part of the Grant Professional Association or any other professional grant guild or whatever, they're going to they're going to tell you this on an ethical level. We don't do commission.
Okay.
Now I've won over 35 million. I wish I could work on the commission. So, especially with the REAP grant, because I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. Um, I was brainstorming like, is there a way I could do that? And a lot of people are like, yeah, can I pay you after? The problem with paying after, there's a number of them on the client's end, and this is what I try and help people understand, because they're like, well, why would I pay you as a project? Like, what if I lose? This is a huge waste of my money and time. And my response to that is that this is a huge waste of my money and time, right? Like if I do all this work, I have no control over it's not like a loan broker, right? This is number one, this is free money, right? This is a grant. And it's not free. I shouldn't say free. It's money that you're going to have to follow through on the project, but there's no equity. There's no you're not going to have to pay it back. So what we have to do is really craft a very compelling proposal, and that takes a lot of work. So for a federal grant, that can take anywhere from 200 to 250 hours of our time, and it's a huge risk for us to take on to get paid on commission. Also, I won't go into a project if someone is unwilling to pay, because many times, well, I've never had anyone just quit on me and not turn in a grant, but that's because I do things different than other grant writers. There's a lot of grant writers that are like, okay, yeah, you can pay me at the end, and there's no end, right? They never turn in the grant, and they're like, okay, no problem. There's a lot of new grant writers, so you'll find grant writers that'll say, yeah, you can pay me afterwards if we win. They probably haven't written a grant, and they probably don't know how hard it is, right? Because there's times that it can feel like writing up a dissertation or a thesis. Like it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of planning, and you have to bring a lot of people together. And so you got to have a good project manager that can connect and ask the right questions, right? kind of like you with the podcast, like you just know how to like, okay, what questions am I going to ask next? That's oftentimes what we're doing as grant writers. It's like, how do I suss out this solid project and get the best from everybody? And how do I prepare them to win? So you got to know what winning looks like. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, look, obviously these grant writers have to get their feet wet at some point. And once you know what winning looks like, you can keep winning. And that's worth it. But yeah, the way that I work is I do either upfront or we'll work something out, but I can't do commission, and I don't do hourly because oftentimes if I do hourly, then I go way over, and then because you, it's just easier to know exactly how much is this going to cost and do it on a project base because you're paying for a project, you're paying for a final proposal that gets turned in, and the thing that we haven't talked about is that oftentimes you can reuse that. You can reuse that proposal. That's the other reason why getting paid on commission would be horrible. Is that you've given them a project or a product that they can then just go and turn into another agency and win again, or win on their own. And so it's a lot of work. It's kind of a labor of love, and there's not a lot of grant writers out there. Especially in the ag industry. There's a few of them, but it's yeah, it's sometimes hard. We do understand that a lot of these people have pretty tight budgets, but that's why, like you were saying, there's other ways, and I'm trying to be a lot better with this year because I've realized, like especially with the REAP grant, if people can't pay for it, no problem. But let me get you the templates so you can succeed. Let me organize these folders, give you the templates, and maybe we'll get on one call. I'll work with you on how to do this on your own, and then maybe I'll help you submit it because it's a nightmare to. So for example, um, there's a lot of pitfalls if you try and do it on your own, and if you do it on your own and fail, you're not doing it again. Like
It's that darn grant. Yeah.
yeah, you're just gonna
Grant's
blame the
fault.
grant. It's not you, it's the grant. Um, I've seen that way too much, and I think that. So I just talked to a gentleman that was trying to do the REAP grant, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm doing this all on my own." I said, "Okay, look, I'm just gonna say this. I've got these templates and these organized folders, and I haven't lost one of these. So if you want to just use those, let's come up with some kind of deal here." And I was like, just a couple questions. Have you already submitted an email to the tribes to show that your land is um, that it's going to have this construction on it because it's federal funding. You need to know, let the tribes know about it. And he's like, no, I haven't done that. I'm like, well, you have to do it within 6 weeks of the deadline. So it's a second deadline that people don't know about. And so there's all sorts of little surprises like that. And same thing with like the SAM registration. If you haven't done that and you try and do that the week of, and you're like, oh, I'm going to wait till this, around the deadline, you're going to miss the deadline. And then you're really frustrated because you're like, well, this is a stupid thing. Nobody told me about that. Like nobody told you about it because they think that you're probably going to use a grant writer. You're going for $1 million,
Guys are
but
building job security in for yourself, I tell you.
I, it must be. I don't know why they make it so complicated. I think California does a lot better job. They make things a little bit more simplified for farmers and ranchers, and I hope that it gets that way. Not because I want to be put out of a job, but I think that the world's a better place if we can get if we can get the funding more down to the community level and to the farmers and ranchers.
So what's the next book in mind?
Well, I that was a labor of love, man. I wasn't sure I was going to make it through. The next book that I've thought about, I really love working with my family. I've got 5 kids, and I sometimes find ways to get them involved with my business. One of the big things that I've always loved about farming was working with my dad or my grandpa and my uncles. It's just a family business, and being a consultant, it sometimes just feels like you're on your own. So we've over the last year or so we've made a a little family management company. The kids work with me every once in a while, like once a week. Sometimes they'll do advertising. They do. Hold on one second. I'll grab this. It's a Lego um, tractor here. Yeah. So yeah, this is the so they'll build these things and they'll do stop motion videos and we'll do advertising and sometimes I just trying to find ways to get them involved in business because I feel like that's something that I got. Probably the biggest thing that I learned growing up was just how to run business, and I learned it on the farm. Learned it from other farmers. Most of them weren't great business people, but they definitely were passionate about farming. And I think being able to get my kids involved has been something I'm really passionate about. So I'm kind of looking at like, could I write a book about that? Just more for myself. I mean, this other book was more for farmers and ranchers. This book would probably just be for myself. Just how do you do it? How do you get your family involved? And then maybe if there's one person that reads it, cool. But I do love writing though.
The other thing I think it'd be a healthy book, and I don't know if it's out there yet, but there has to be a serious discussion for farm families because we're, again, these big asset intensive businesses that when a generation dies and we divide it equally amongst the kids, and one of the two, three, four kids is the only one that's actively managing the farm, dividing it in half, thirds, or fourths is not the right approach. And a lot of that happens, and some there needs to be some good strategies and some good thought there in how that works. So
Yeah, it can get pretty toxic.
that
I
could be
can't.
your third book. There you go.
It could.
Um,
I'll probably be writing more about grants and how to set up these projects, but I pretty much did a brain dump in the holistic funding approach. Like I wanted to make sure I had everything in there that was useful that I'd learned from that. It's basically taken a lot of the tips, the secrets that the universities are using. It's taken all the secrets that these big nonprofits that continually win and win. It's taken their playbook and just saying, let's get this out to the farmers because they can do the same thing. It's not rocket science.
so where do we get the book, and how do farmers connect with you if they would like to begin going down the path of getting grants for what they want to accomplish?
Yeah, so my book is on Amazon right now. I'm going to be getting it out on as well. There's a couple other areas I'll be getting it out this next year, and I'll share that on my website. But Amazon, it's called the Holistic Funding Approach, and you'll find it. There's only one book that's like that. It's and you'll see my name, Juan Whiting. My website is strayacresconsulting.com. And on there, what we've done is, and we're expanding it even more. If you go on there, there's a quiz that you can take to find out what services are going to be most helpful for you. So if that's just a quick review and you don't have the budget to do a full, you know, support grant build out, then yeah, we what I'm wanting to do is offer whatever services I can to get you across the finish line and get you funded. And I think that, like you said, that could be just at least to review somebody's eyes on it to say, hey, you know what, you went down the wrong road. Let's try again. That might be really frustrating. So you might want to do a couple reviews, one in the middle, one at the end, rather than waiting to the end to find out that you shouldn't do it with on by hand on with your pen or something like that. Um, so yeah, if you go on there, there's a service page. You can find out what we offer. This next year, I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing like I've got all this equipment as well. I'm going to be doing a podcast and sharing more just like this, probably getting farmers and ranchers on to just share their stories and share success stories. Also giving tips on like how do we write this up, because I feel like it's I've done a lot of writing and I've shared that by book. There's people are It's so much easier to just be sitting in the tractor or sitting on your horse listening to a podcast. And I know because I did this all the time, but I learned a lot from podcasts. Um, and it's just nice to hear it and hear it simple and be able to really relate with the person that's sitting behind the mic. So that's one thing that we're going to be doing starting next year, and we're going to be offering potentially an online toolkit that people can use, both for the REAP grant, because I feel like that's one that I want to get out there. And if people just want to do it on their own, cool. Here's a do-it-yourself toolkit. Don't try and do it all by yourself. Not all of it. Just at least, I'm begging people, just at least get the right templates, get the right organization. Because if you do it professionally, then the reviewers will notice it and they'll pay you. You get the money. And so if you're one of those people that loves doing it on your own, which is probably about 90% of the farmers and ranchers out there, and a lot of them are, it's either the guy's the accountant or the wife's the accountant, and she loves doing all the paperwork, and she's like, look, I just want to do this by myself. Okay, but don't make her search all over the web to find it, because they make it so miserable to find out how do we set up grants.gov, how do we submit. Like, they don't make it intuitive. There's nothing about it that's intuitive. And I say this because there's been many grants that I've spent just countless hours trying to figure out just how do I submit the grant, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I see people trying to do it on their own for the first time, they won't make it. And I'm not saying that to be, braggadocious or anything. I just think that it's one of those things that there's just so many pitfalls. It's just easier to have just a little bit of support, if anything.
Right.
So,
Well, one thing that is really interesting about what you do is I really vision for my farm. I want to triple the profit per acre, and by over what I would do just with commodity production. So, we focus on the profitability of commodities. That's an ongoing thing. The second thing is how do I do more value add and how do I get closer to the consumer with everything that I raise? So, how do I raise, high protein, food grade, non-GMO, organic, regenerative, all those things that have labels, or I produce it and process it into flour or meat and get directly to consumer to where I you know, double the revenue there. But the third thing, and it's kind of the most elusive, but I know it's there in my gut, is I call it ecosystem services bucket. Okay. Carbon sequestration, water quality, bird habitat, all of these type of services that a conventional farm is not providing to the environment or the community or people downstream from us. And I really think we can do that. And, yourself would be a person that could really join with us there to help meet that goal because, farmers, we're equipped to farm. Okay. We're, we think we're pretty good at that. There's always room for improvement, right? And we can kind of get our head around, value add and specialty crops and getting direct to consumer. There's some resources out there for that. But just throwing this vision on the board, I want a third of my revenue to come from all the good things that I'm doing farming this way that I know is of value to somebody else. It's like, fantastic. That's a great idea, Monty, but how in the world do you ever find that? Well, here you go. You're the person to help us do that, and we'll probably be in touch and work our way through how we can accomplish some of those things. So I do appreciate your time today and helping us understand a topic that you know, can make a farmer a little itchy. Sounds like taxes, sounds like forms, sounds like filling out stuff at the USDA. Ooh, yuck. But there's some great reasons for it.
there are. And I think that, we should be celebrating farmers and ranchers that are taking that initiative, like you're saying. So, just if there's one thing that I can end with, it's to encourage people to really think about their business and think about what they're already doing to improve their communities. Or if they aren't doing it, what they want to do. to improve their communities, their ecosystems, like you're saying, because you're talking about ecosystems, but there's probably things on a social level that you're doing or want to do. Maybe it's with the Boy Scouts of America. Maybe it's with the, veterans, mental health, trying to bring them out onto the farm. There's so many great things, and I love seeing it. But I also know that people are strained, and if they're already doing it, let's find a way to get them funding. Let's find a way to, because I can tell you that these universities don't do anything for free, right? So I think I'm not saying that we should do everything to get paid. I think we should volunteer and give what we can. But I think we should also be open to receiving funds when our country is grateful for us. And I would say it, I would look at it that way, is look at it as your community, your country, and the government. You're solving a problem that no one else can solve.
Very well said. Well, I thank you for all that you're doing in this to make things possible and big ideas possible for farmers that want to think different, do different, and be better. And thank you for the book. I'm going to buy it and get to reading, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you, Monty. Appreciate it.
I'm so glad you were able to join us for this conversation. As someone who's written grants, I'm excited to see how they can play a role in helping growers adopt strategies, set actionable goals, build partnerships, tell compelling stories, and connect with the resources needed to bring their vision to life. And if you'd like to learn more about how we're helping growers make their goals and strategies come to life, check out our website at asn.farm. And there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.